Being alone in the endless sea is terrifying enough, especially when there's no way to escape if anything bad happens, let alone dealing with the paranormal at the same time. This is exactly what I had to face a few years ago. I work as a marine technician for an international shipping company. My job requires me to travel long distances on shipping boats, ready to repair and maintain them in case of any issues. I've been doing this for the past decade and have seen a lot of interesting stuff, but nothing comes close to the terrifying encounter I'm about to share with you. Our boat was loaded with various products for delivery to China, and the trip was expected to be around 8 days long. This wasn't our first time making this journey, but little did we know that it would turn into a chilling experience. The first 4 days of sailing were smooth. The weather was perfect, and we were even ahead of schedule. However, the beginning of the 5th day brought one of the roughest experiences I've ever witnessed. Heavy rain poured, and the wind was so strong that it felt like it could blow us off course. Throughout this, I had to stay in the boat's hull, anticipating any weather-related issues and closely monitoring the struggling engine. Suddenly, we were all called to the top of the boat as the captain had something important to show us. A few hundred meters away, we noticed another boat. In such situations, captains usually communicate through the radio to identify themselves and ensure everything is fine. However, this time, our captain received no response at all. A bad sign, usually attributed to the weather. As we approached the boat, we made a startling discovery. The abandoned boat bore the same name and logo as our company. Perplexed, we contacted our company's communication center for guidance. The company denied any missing ships, but suggested we try to communicate with the other boat. Radio communications failed, even though it worked perfectly when calling land. With no response to our calls, we decided to board the mysterious vessel. Armed with flashlights, 3 colleagues and I ventured onto the boat to explore and offer assistance if needed. The inside reeked of decay and rust, nearly causing me to vomit, but we pressed on. Despite our calls, the boat remained eerily silent and dark. Searching different rooms, we found no one. It seemed as if this ship had appeared out of nowhere, abandoned by its crew. However, things took a serious turn as we discovered blood drops on the floor. Following the trail, it led us to a locked cabin, forcing us to break it open. Behind that door, we encountered a horrifying sight. The entire crew lay dead, their clothes soaked in dry blood, all bearing a terrified expression in their faces, as if their end was brutal. The stench of rot overwhelmed me, and the realization hit that this wasn't an accident. The way they died and how they were locked inside pointed to murder. As we left, planning to report our findings, we heard footsteps behind us. What started as faint, slow steps became faster and louder. Glancing back, I saw a massive man very quickly approaching us. His torso naked, serious signs of malnourishment appeared on him. The man was armed with a bloody screwdriver. He appeared to have lost any remaining shreds of sanity. A twisted smile played on his lips, and manic laughter echoed through the air as he relentlessly swung the bloody screwdriver in an attempt to stab us. Rushing to the deck, the deranged killer was right behind us the entire time, clearly knowing the ship much better than we did, as he was able to navigate freely despite the pitch darkness. We tried to escape to our ship, and once our crew noticed the man chasing us, they threw everything they had at him, creating a temporary barrier. Finally making it to our boat, the captain sped away, ensuring a safe distance from the unknown threat. With no choice but to continue our journey, we reported everything to our company upon reaching land. However, our sanity was questioned, leaving me with a nagging feeling that our company was hiding something from us, something we may never know. I still recall that ill-fated night in the middle of the endless sea. The pitch darkness of that night certainly didn't help us. We used to embark on fishing journeys in the vast sea as part of our job, mainly targeting bluefin tuna, which dwelled far from the coast. Typically, we would spend a few days at sea, hunting a couple of decent tunas, return to the coast to sell them for profit, rest for a couple of days, and then repeat the process. I hadn't been doing this for too long. I recently joined my uncle, who had been engaged in this with his 2 children for a while. As usual, we set sail that night with our destination in mind. My uncle steered his weathered fishing boat towards a new location a few kilometers away from our usual fishing spot. The area held a lot of potential. The rest of us checked our supplies and set up our fishing equipment, preparing for the task at hand. Suddenly, the weather began to change. The wind grew more aggressive, and the rain poured down so heavily that we had to use various plastic containers we found to rid ourselves of the stagnant water. It was unlike anything I had seen before, and it seemed we had sailed into a storm. Before we knew it, we found ourselves stranded in the middle of the sea. The aggressive weather had apparently damaged our engine, rendering us unable to move forward or return to where we started. Our last hope was to call for help from the land. We reached for our radio, but to our dismay, we couldn't communicate with anyone. There was no signal at all. By then, the storm had calmed down, leaving us in a silent sea as dawn sent faint rays of light all around us. Thick clouds of mist suddenly surrounded us from every direction, making me feel as if I was suffocating. Moments later, our fish finder started beeping, indicating the presence of nearby fish underneath. However, what the screen captured was something entirely different. Hundreds of meters away, the device detected an abnormally low frequency. The size of that entity was nothing short of enormous. It wasn't a fish at all. As we noticed the colossal thing approaching our boat through our fish finder screen, the entire area around us began vibrating. It wasn't limited to our boat. Even the sea itself had big waves forming around us, and our boat started shaking aggressively, throwing us around. Suddenly, something slowly emerged from the water. It was massive and spherical, made of what seemed to be iron, and it elevated a few meters above us, spinning extremely fast. I didn't know what the thing was, and I felt a tremendous pressure on my chest, as if my soul was being extracted from my body. The object emitted a deafening noise and started flashing, producing intense rays of light, bright enough that it was enough to illuminate the entire sea until the horizon. The pressure against my body felt overwhelming as the object increased its speed. At one point, I thought I was simply dying. I could barely breathe, and I finally collapsed. The last thing I could remember was waking up to find myself in another boat, a Coast Guard's boat. Looking around, I thankfully found my uncle and both of his children, who were still unconscious. The Coast Guards reported that they found us clinging to a shipwreck, most likely our own. Rushed to the hospital, we received care. My uncle and his kids woke up a few hours later, but what struck me as odd was that they had completely forgotten anything about what happened, leaving me as the only witness to that fateful night. Taking a cruise has always been a dream of mine, but once it became true, it quickly turned into a nightmare that I wanted to end quickly. As my vacation neared, the idea of going on a cruise and exploring the beautiful ocean seemed perfect. Enjoying the gorgeous cyan blue sky that reflects on the sea, and all the calmness seemed so tempting. The ticket for the 7-day trip cost me around $3,000. Quite expensive, but it had always been my childhood dream. We started the journey early in the morning, around 6 a.m. The harbor was full of families seeing off their loved ones, waving as we sailed away into the endless ocean. All I could see was the stunning blue horizon where the sky meets the ocean. The beginning of the trip was amazing, well organized with lots of activities for us to enjoy. The nightly orchestra, karaoke, and theater were my personal favorites. Unfortunately, the fun wouldn't last too long. One night, as I was walking on the ship's deck, enjoying the cold ocean air and the sight of the moon and stars, I saw a small crowd forming. Curious, I went over and asked what was going on. From the sea, we saw something not visible in the dark. When we used our flashlights, we realized it was a human corpse. We told the crew, and they decided to pull the body out of the water. I saw it happen. The body looked recent, clothes intact and no signs of rot. There was also a weird symbol carved into the man's forehead, a circle cut in half with a straight line. We didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to find out. To avoid scaring the other passengers, the crew and I decided not to tell them. The ship kept going, but things started getting worse. With my flashlight, I saw more bodies coming out of the water. Women, men, and even kids. They were all around the ship. The smell on the ship quickly turned bad, smelling of rot and decay, mixing with my motion sickness, making me puke multiple times. The bodies kept coming, dozens, then more than 200. They all had the same symbol on their foreheads. There were so many I couldn't see the water around us anymore. The ship was slowing down, barely pushing through the bodies. Passengers downstairs noticed and started coming on deck. When they saw the dead bodies, everything turned chaotic. Screams, cries, and breakdowns filled the boat. Suddenly, the engine ceased working, and the diagnostic tool reported that the propeller was stuck. I had a pretty good idea of what might have caused that. We only had one solution. Some of us had to jump off the boat into that pit of dead bodies and try to free the propeller. The boat had 3 diving suits, and 2 crew members volunteered for the task. However, no third one wanted to step forward. Being the only physically fit doctor on board, I felt responsible in case anything happened to the 2 down there, and somehow I ended up as the last volunteer. As we jumped, none of us landed in the water. Instead, we stepped on the backs of those dead people, pushing through them to reach the water and then the propeller. The sight was absolutely horrific. The first thing that met my eyes was the gaze of a dead person, fixated on mine as if he was purposely looking at me. After much effort, we freed the propeller. Too many bodies were stuck between its blades and the body of the ship, but we managed to sort everything out and attempted to resurface. As we were doing that, I started feeling my body getting heavier. I didn't quite understand why until I looked down and figured it out. Someone was grabbing my foot. He was one of the victims, too. His facial expression mirrored a terrifying fear, and as much as I wanted to save him, my survival instinct kicked in. In a moment of terror, I kicked him in the face, leaving him to drown to his fate. We then left the place, heading back for the land. What we witnessed was reported, and an investigation was opened. It remains open to this day, with no new information at all. It had been years now, but the faces of those I've seen that night are still engraved in my brain.